David, it's not allowing me to go live. Just want to see if I can clear this up. Okay, that's it. And we live. Welcome, David Cannon. Again, it's going to be a great chat again. And thank you for making time again to have a chat to us.
No problem.
It's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
The honor is mine, sir. Okay, so this year we've decided we're going to talk specifically about innovation. And you've got some thoughts around innovation going wrong, and maybe also some thoughts on making sure that it doesn't go wrong. So a shorter show also this year, 30 minutes. So let's get cracking. Why do innovation go wrong?
A lot of reasons for that. So we'll try and narrow it down to 3 or 4 as we go through this morning. But in no particular order, I think one of the main reasons that innovation goes wrong is, of course, our old favorite, the culture of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Organizations like to be innovative in some parts. They discourage innovation in other parts. And the balance between the two depends on the organization. So some organizations put a lot of importance in innovation, and there's a lot of innovation happening on that side of the business. Others will keep that more to a minimum and focus more on doing the things that they already do, but much better. The problem is not whether the innovation happens or not. That is entirely a business decision. So how much innovation do we need? Well, that depends on how competitive you need to be and how much you need to improve and so on. The problem comes in the space between innovation and operational business as usual. So I live in Texas. In Texas, we have these really fairly extreme weather conditions when it comes to tornadoes, thunderstorms, hail, and that kind of thing. And one of the reasons that this exists is because you have a lot of warm, humid air coming up from the Gulf, and you have cold air coming down from Canada. It's always the Canadians' fault. They like to avoid all blame and be polite about things, but really they send a lot of cold weather down our way, and when that meets with that humid air, that hot humid air, there is all kinds of turbulence and stuff that starts happening, and it's one of the causes of these extreme weather patterns. And to me, that's very similar to where innovation and business as usual meet. So you have one group that has a culture of let's do things differently, let's break the rules. We need more funding, and whatever we ask for, we're going to get. And on the other side of the organization, you have people who are rewarded for keeping things constant and consistent and predictable every day. And when these two cultures come together, so for example, when something innovative needs to be introduced into the mainstream of the business, this is where a lot of those storm clouds start happening. This is where it causes a lot of anxiety amongst the people who are rewarded for keeping things the same. And it causes a lot of frustration to those who are rewarded to change things because they're coming up against each other. And it's okay if these things are understood, verbalized, in other words, spoken about, communicated. But what invariably happens is organizations, there are these unwritten rules about whether we're going to accept innovation or not. And people don't talk about them. So they love to promote these events like, let's have a green box event where we encourage little teams to be innovative and come up with great ideas, and then we're going to reward them. But behind the scenes, well, let's not choose anything that's going to rock the boat. Let's not choose anything that's going to change the culture too radically. Forget about the external environment and how much more competitive it's going to make us. Is it going to upset the way we like to work? And, Christensen, who I know that you and I are both big fans of, he talks about values. And the values of an organization will determine the extent to which they really encourage innovation and are geared to accept it. His conclusion, though, is that to solve this problem is to actually, when you have significant innovation that is aimed at significantly different customers, is to spin off the business completely. That there is no solution to this culture clash. I think it depends on the size and extent of the innovation, but this is one of the problems that is probably the biggest issue, I think, to start discussing. Sorry, Jan.
So, I mean, that gets back to this corporate immune system that I talked about in the blue book, that blue book. How much? Okay, let me take one step back. Drucker said, "What gets measured gets done." And one of the reasons why the people in ops resist all of these changes is because they get measured against not changing anything.
Exactly.
So would it help if we change the way that we measure people in the organization? And now I specifically talk about management and up to middle management. Would that make a difference?
I think it certainly makes a difference. So as you embrace a more agile approach to things, what you start doing is measuring and rewarding on the extent of changes that you're able to achieve. But what's really cool about that is that you do it in a very controlled way. And so those people who are very comfortable with structure, with formality, actually find it a lot more palatable to make those changes, to be agile and to change with the organization. I think that is one of the strengths of an agile with a capital A kind of approach, is that it formalizes these kinds of changes and makes them measurable and makes them more palatable. I was going to say comfortable, but sometimes it's not comfortable. Palatable.
Yeah.
Can we deal with it? Can we manage it? Yeah. Can we accept it? So yes, I definitely think that metrics is a way to go. But it's not just a case of finding a metric out of somewhere and saying, okay, we're going to use this metric. It's a case of what's really important in this change to our organization, and what's important for our employees and other stakeholders to not only in their behavior, but in the kind of values that they need to represent. If we need them, and this is the most difficult thing, if we need them to change their value system in some way, even if it's a small change, it is an extremely difficult thing to do. Yeah. So the only way to do that really is to find a metric that takes them, lets them focus on something of higher importance, higher value than something that is more tactical or operational.
Yeah, I can't remember who said that. It may even be Stephen Covey that said, if you focus on what you need to change, then it's really difficult to do that. But if you focus on the new thing that you're doing, the change happens in any case. Yeah. So So I think there's also something to be said for the fact that fighting versus striving, and that's why I like this higher value that you're talking about. Yeah, it's not focused on negative stuff, all the pain that goes with it.
So there's an interesting set of theories about this that I've been reading about online, and it's about, do you focus on the long-term objective or do you focus on the day-to-day? And there are proponents who say, look, if you want to run a marathon, for example, and you're a couch potato, you have very little exercise and you're overweight. I'm talking about myself here, obviously. And you want to ramp up to run a marathon. What you need to do is forget about the marathon and focus on day to day. How many steps can you get in? How far can you run? How fast can you run? And is that improving? And the way to do this is to focus on your routine. So every day, get up and do something. So start out by stretching, then walk a bit, then run a bit, time it, and do that every day. And after 3 or 6 months, however long it is, you will be fit enough to run that marathon. So the theory there is focus on the day-to-day, get the routine. But on the other hand, you have this idea as well, if you don't know that you're training for a marathon, how will you know what the routine needs to be? And I think the answer lies somewhere in between. It's always understanding that there is a big picture. I have to run the marathon. But at times, I need to put that out of mind and focus on getting the day-to-day done. Understanding that I have designed my day-to-day routine so that over time, I'll be able to achieve that big picture.
Yeah.
And so there are going to be times where you have to focus, where you have to, stop talking about the big picture and focus on how do we get this particular set of tasks done. But that particular set of tasks has to be designed with the big picture in mind.
Yeah. Let's cover again. Begin with the end in mind.
Right.
Yeah. But I think you're right. And I mean, it's one of the things that people struggle with when they start using agile methods with a big A. And they don't understand why, as a coach, you tell them, no, but don't change what the method tells you. Says, but that's not agile. Says, I know it's not agile, but there's a reason for it, because it's about establishing and embedding new patterns within the organization. And once those patterns are embedded, then go and change stuff by all means. But you have to, because it's those patterns that facilitates the cultural change or the behavioral change. Yeah? And then the behavioral change eventually leads to a cultural change. So I like this dual face. Begin with the end in mind, but focus on what you need to do today. I love it. I think it's great advice.
Well, and you've raised another important point, which is understand the rules before you break them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And if you're a musician, that's a very important principle because, hardly anybody writes music like Bach anymore. There are still people that do that. Most people have broken those rules that were created 300 years ago, 400 years ago. But they broke them intentionally, having understood what they were in the first place. Yeah. That a reason for breaking them, and that reason has contributed to the quality of the music that they produced. Yeah. And I think exactly the same is true for organizations. We talk about this when we're outsourcing. Right? Do not outsource something you don't understand. Yeah. Don't move something to the cloud if you can't manage it in-house, or if it is absolutely so commoditized that there's no point in you doing it in-house. But you have to understand it before you change it.
Okay, but your title that you gave me said traps.
Yes.
Okay, and we've talked about one so far.
So the first trap, and if I can paraphrase what I've just said, the first trap, the first problem area is the fact that you assume that innovation is good and therefore everybody will be behind it. We in IT are masters of this. Right? When we create projects, We don't understand why people are not on board on the project. This is a great idea. It's a wonderful system. It's going to do everything you need to do. Why don't you love it? And the same is true of innovation, right? So the trap is assuming that it is the value or the quality of the innovation that will drive its acceptance. And that is not the case. It is the values of the company. It is the metrics that are used today to measure the performance of people in the company that will determine whether that innovation is acceptable or not. So that's the first trap. The second trap is related to the last point I made about understanding the rules before you break them. And to me, that is, the trap is that the innovation replaces the need for rigor. And in English.
Expand a bit on that.
Yeah, so if innovation is so good, if it is leapfrogged us ahead into a new way of thinking, a new way of doing, then we don't have to worry about the basic disciplines that fitted into the old environment.
And that's not true.
No, it's not true at all. So the assumption there is that innovation includes all of the rules that came before, or it invalidates the rules that came before, one or the other.
And that's the important one. So we have to find a mechanism to invalidate the rules that prohibits us from getting ahead.
Right. So, and it's two things. So it's, again, depends on the innovation, right? In some innovations, you need to invalidate the rules, the sacred cows. You need to move them aside so that you can move ahead. In other cases, you actually need to embrace some of the rules in order for the innovation to work properly.
Yeah. Can I say that brings us sort of to the adapt type 1 and 2 innovation versions 3 and 4? Where in 1 and 2, you need to abolish them, with some of them at least, and type 3 and 4, you need to embrace them.
I think that's,
it's not a statement, it's a question.
I think that's a very good summary of what I'm saying.
Okay.
So there are some types of innovation where you are actually, and these are really, let me use a different term, discontinuous innovation. So in discontinuous innovation, which means the innovation completely replaces the thing that came before.
Okay.
Cars, horses, right? Computers.
Yeah.
Right. There is no way in which you can go back to what came before. It has completely changed the way in which we work, and there is no going back. There are still some of the things that are in place. There are still some of the principles that are in place. But by and large, we have completely discontinued the use of the old and replaced that use with the new, with some exceptions.
And that sort of implies a new set of rules comes along.
It's yeah, exactly. So in those cases, it's about how do we move the rules, so which rules are invalidated. So some will be invalidated, they don't apply anymore. Some rules will continue, but need to be adapted. And then there are new rules.
Okay.
So, for example, we now use computers to automate finance. And so the rules about how we store records and how we maintain those records and how we record them and how we communicate them, that has completely changed. However, your basic accounting system has not. So the principles of accounting remain the same. Those rules still have to be applied when you create accounting software or when you use that accounting software. The way in which you do accounting, though, very different. The rules that apply, very different.
That sort of reminds me once again of one of the things that Christensen talked about is this concept of jobs to be done. That a job doesn't change over time. The job that needs to be done stays the same for thousands of years. It's just the way that we do it that changes, and it's really difficult to separate the job from how we do the job, because we tend to think about how we do things rather than what the outcome is. Yeah.
Right. Which leads me to the third trap, which is part of the second trap, really. So the second trap is, knowing when to break the rules, knowing when to create new rules, and knowing when to adapt the old rules.
Yeah.
And that is the trap of assuming that innovation is always better.
Okay.
So we can simply follow it, and we can be sure that we are going to grow, thrive, succeed. And that is not always the case. And so, case in point, that is kind of it's a favorite of mine right now, but it's very topical for many companies, is the use of the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
We have something highly innovative, changed the way in which not only the way we consume IT services, but the way in which society works. Changed a lot of the rules. Some of the rules were disregarded, of course. To our detriment. And so we suddenly started to realize, hey, hold on. You can't just go online and say whatever you like about whoever you like. You cannot replace real communities with virtual communities completely. The rules need to be applied. And yes, they may be different, and there may be some new rules that have to be put in place, but there are certain cultural norms that have to be carried forward. That's in terms of social media, for example. But in terms of how our organization uses cloud, a lot of organizations just bought the hype immediately. Within a year or two of the first cloud announcements, we have companies, saying things like cloud first. No other qualification, right? Just cloud first.
Yeah, and all they did was lift and shift, and then it didn't work.
And it didn't work because the innovation itself it requires you to work differently. It requires you to think differently. And yet, at the same time, it requires you to use disciplines that were applicable to the old way of doing things. For example, capacity management. And why do we have unpredictable costs in cloud? Because we cannot predict our use. Why can't we predict our use? Because we're not doing capacity management properly. And I can tell you now, you can pick up a book from the 1970s that talks about capacity management, and it will help you solve that problem.
Yeah, and how old is the principle of demand management? I mean, it's
exactly
30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. In IT, and it goes back even before that into manufacturing. This is not a new concept. Yet we were promised that in cloud you don't have to worry. What you'll do is you'll see directly. You'll be able to see what you're paying and what you're consuming, and you'll be able to adjust your use in real time. No, didn't work. Didn't work like that because we didn't set ourselves up to manage ourselves like that. And we didn't put our core governance and disciplines in place to be able to have to be able to manage that. Financial management's another one, right? So, thank goodness the cloud is here. Somebody else will do the accounting. All we have to do is get the bill, show it to the users who use it, and we'll pay it. Oh my goodness! All of a sudden, it's like, hey, hold on! I thought you told me storage is going to be cheaper. Why am I paying so much? Well, here it is. I don't understand this bill. What do I have to do to reduce it? It's the same discussion that we had 30 years ago. It's exactly the same discussion. It's a different technology. There are different tools that we use to manage it, to get this information, but it's the same question being asked again. So for me, it's very important to, when you want to go for an innovation, is to, again, fully understand the rules and how those rules apply to the innovation before you go for it. I think well, that's the third trap. Don't just go for an innovation because it's new.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll give you another example. Apps in the cloud, right?
Okay.
They are so easy to subscribe to and get going. Here, try creating this workflow. See how easy that was? Sure, it's easy. So you create that workflow. And the group that subscribed to that piece of software is now using that workflow, only to discover that there is data associated with that workflow that should be used by more than just the group that is using that application. And now we have to try and figure out how all of this data fits together.
Yeah.
Because it's not just one app now. Now it's several apps, and they don't speak to each other. And now we have to get a new cloud data warehousing service to complement this so that we can get all this data together and so on and so forth. So we should never be fooled by the seeming ease of innovative solutions. There is always something underneath it. Now, they may well have solved the puzzle on how to apply the rules. They may well have done that. But then we need to understand how. We need to do our due diligence. So if they say, oh, you don't need to worry about capacity management anymore. It takes care of itself. Show me how.
Yeah. Dave, we've got a few questions or a few comments on the, what's his name, on the stream. So I'm just going to shift a little bit closer because I don't have my glasses on. Okay, glitch zone in between. Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Simone. Yes, that is the glitch zone. Okay. Yeah, just call it Tornado Alley.
Yeah, that's Geoffrey Moore. Yeah.
Yeah.
So incidentally, yeah, the when you have to follow the rules, you're on the other side of the chasm, because otherwise you're going to get so much resistance that nobody's going to deal with you. So it's awesome to be a radical before you crossing the chasm, but no big organization wants to deal with a radical, and a maverick. Okay, let's quickly see in YouTube. There was a question. Somebody popped me a message and say, so where was that from? Let me see if I can see it on my phone. I just saw okay, Simone, just ask the question again, because I don't know what the question is that you want us to answer.
While you're answering that,
it looks like you're answering the questions.
Simone made a comment, and I just want to follow up on that. And the comment is that many of the conversations have not changed, just using new buzzwords. And I want to add to that. You're absolutely right, Simone, of course, as you usually are. Always are. But the point I want to make is that I cannot tell you how many times over 30 years I have heard these words: IT service management is dead.
Okay. Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times I've heard those words. And yet, whenever I get called in to solve an issue in an organization, it is because service management needs to be applied and properly applied.
Yeah, it's not dead.
Yeah.
The king is dead. Long lives the king.
Yeah, I mean, you notice I didn't use any brand names here. It's regardless of what brand you're using, and I've heard it for. I mean, you've heard about, DevOps is in its death throes. ITIL is dead. Agile, methodology A is kind of, it's overdone.
Yeah.
How many times do you hear this stuff? And the reason people say that is because they either didn't apply it properly, or they thought the innovation had taken care of it, so they didn't have to do it anymore. Or they just they thought they were smart and didn't have to follow the rules because in a brave new digital world, the rules don't apply anymore, and it's just not true.
So if you say watch this, you know you're in for trouble. That's famous last words. Don't
Hold my beer.
think
Yeah.
innovation doesn't come with with rules or governance or things that you need, or risk for that matter. I mean, the
No,
mere fact that you want to change something is risky.
Yeah, and you know, I don't want to be too negative about this. The fact is that if you had to stick to the rules all the time, you wouldn't have innovation, right? And
Yeah.
so there are times when you do need to break those rules. There are times when you need those brave souls to go out there and you know, the radicals, you call them, to adopt these things and drive them and make them happen. Absolutely, we want that to continue to happen. It's what we're talking about here is when we're adopting innovation, or when we are wanting to move from an innovation stage into a use, you know, permanent use stage.
And I think another important thing is also bear in mind that it's not only about, you know, your operations. It may also be changing your business model, or understanding that a customer wants to do business with you differently, because of the new technology and the innovation that it brings along. Okay, so let's summarize, David, the 3 things again.
Let's see if we can remember that. Make sure that you're culturally prepared to move from innovation mode to business as usual mode. Make sure that you're maintaining that balance between big picture and getting the job done. Secondly, understand that there are rules that apply to the innovative technology that you're using. You may not know what they are yet, but there are rules, and you're either going to have to break old rules to adopt it, you're going to have to adapt some of the rules that exist, or you're going to have to create new rules.
Yeah,
but you're not going to be able to use innovation without rules.
Also importantly, you can't go and change the rules if you don't understand them. So if there's new rules with the new technologies, you can't assume that you can just make it up as you go along. You need to understand what those rules are, and how they, maybe what the friction is between them and the older rules. Yeah.
The third thing, and then Lubawetu has a comment there, which is perhaps we should not call it innovation, but enhancement. And there is a point to that. And there is a type of innovation, which is not this continuous innovation, but it is innovation to improve, to enhance, to move us forward. And in those situations, we're not actually breaking the way things work. We're just improving.
Yeah.
But the third rule was, don't just go for an innovation because because it's new and exciting, and seems to promise you things that that you cannot currently do. Fully do your due diligence before moving to the innovation.
Yeah, and I think the type of innovation that you're talking about, we don't have to break the rules, is what ADAPT would call type 4 innovation. Yeah, and that is enhancement. And there is actually another type of, there's 2 types of enhancement. There's enhancement of product, which is type 4, and then there's enhancement of your operations, which is type 5. So for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, and I keep on losing my earpiece, just a quick punt. This is the little blue book that I talked about, and step 2 and 3 in the process is actually quite important. And
if I can just plug that, Johan,
contributor.
I know you feel very comfortable talking about your work, but just another voice is, I think those of you who have not read the book, it is a very practical understanding of what we've been talking about. A lot of times when we talk about strategy and innovation, it's all up in the clouds and it's all fuzzy and it's conceptual. What you've done in this book has brought it down to some very achievable, measurable, tangible steps. So those of you who haven't read it, I would strongly encourage you to do so.
Thank you, David. I'm Luckily, I'm recording this. So I'm definitely going to use it. We're trying to the very first, I must just tell you this before we go, the very first Get It, David was also my guest, and I think we finished just short of 3 hours. Then people say to me, "No, you're nuts. I mean, we can't listen to you for that long." And then for the rest of season 1 and 2, it was an hour, but we're trying to keep it to 30 minutes in season 3. But with David, it's impossible because we're sitting at 36 minutes again.
Yeah,
David, once
sorry.
again, thank you very much for your. Oh no, I mean, it's just. I love talking to you, and it's so easy
Likewise.
for this conversation to go on. Once again, thanks, Stack. We really appreciate your effort and your insight. If you want to contact David, I've taken everything that I'm showing them is off LinkedIn, so it's in the public domain. I don't have to do a privacy disclaimer signed with you because you published it. By all means, do get a hold of David.
Yeah, please do. Welcome. Probably the easiest way is LinkedIn, but you're welcome to contact me on any of those means. Tend not to answer my phone too much these days because I get all kinds of stuff coming through on there. If you phone me and you get through to my voicemail, please leave a message. I will get back to you.
Okay. Well, I can't say that. Please do not leave voice messages for me because I don't listen to them. Okay, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. And next week, or not next week, in 2 weeks' time, we're talking to Suzanne from Hexen, and we're going to talk a little bit about innovation and learning. And then 2 weeks from then, it's Richard de Kock again. So stay tuned for those. Join us. David, stay with me. I'm ending the broadcast. Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.